Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar by Elevate Training and Development. We're very pleased to have Anita McKenzie, who will introduce herself and the work that she has been doing for both children and elders. Today our webinar is about cultural competency, and Anita, through her introduction and her webinar recording, will inform you of how she uses some of the work that she's done with children and families around photography and images, which changes lives and helps with history work for both elders and children. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you, Gradle. Thank you for that. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to all of you about using photos. Just to say that I wear different hats, and today I'm speaking to you as a photographer and arts practitioner. And as Gradle said, I have done quite a bit of work with images with lots of different types of groups, actually, which I'll speak more about as we go along. So I'm going to start off by giving you some background about my work, and then I'll say a bit about the importance of working with photographic images. So first of all, I was born in London, and when I was young I didn't see any pictures of people of colour in the books, etc. around me, and between about the ages of 5 to 7, I think, I can remember being read to at school at story time. And one of the books that stands out in my memory is Little Black Sambo. I think the reason why it stands out is because somehow I knew that there was some kind of inexplainable connection between myself and the character. As I got older, and say around the age of 12, I remember thinking to myself and wondering whether or not black people also wore Victorian clothes, because I'd never seen any images of them in that way, and wondered whether or not we only wore grass skirts like the type I'd seen in Tarzan movies. So in my family, my mother had always, I'd always seen my mum taking photographs, often in the summer. My siblings and I would put on our Sunday best and go to the local gardens so that Mum could take photos of us. I'm sure that I learned my love of photography from my mum. So when my first child started to have a similar experience to mine at school in the 70s, due to a lack of images of black people around, I decided that I would create some of the images that we didn't see of ourselves. Certainly there weren't many images around at that point. So I started a company called Children in Focus with another mum and colleague, and we produced multicultural calendars featuring black and white photos, and we offered it to schools, nurseries and creches across the country. And it went from strength to strength, and we did it for about 10 years while our children were growing up. And that kind of like launched me into photography. And as a working photographer, clients would often comment to me that they found it difficult to obtain images of black people, which I thought was a bit strange, because I was part of a network of photographers, and I knew that photographs were definitely being taken professionally of the black community and within the black community. So kind of that led me into thinking about how publishers could get images of people of colour. So I decided to set up Mackenzie Heritage Picture Archive, a commercial picture library in 1996, to kind of like fill a gap by supplying images of African and Asian heritage people to publishers for exhibitions, books, leaflets, television, etc., so that stories pertaining to black people's lives could be illustrated properly. We went from strength to strength, and after a few years we became the go-to place for images for publishing of black communities. And we had lots of different clients, people like Channel 4, Pluto Press, local authorities, HarperCollins, museums, just to name a few, and voluntary organisations, community, social services, and organisations that worked with families and children in the community. In 2004, we produced the first book by UK Picture Library of engravings, which are really old-fashioned images featuring African and Asian heritage people, called Contrast, Textures and Hues, exploring early printed images of people of African and Asian heritage. The images were commented on by a group of contributors who individually wrote about how they saw and felt about the images. And this answered my question about, the Tarzan thing and the Victorian thing, because I can remember when I found the first engraving that I bought of a black person in Victorian dress. And it was from a street scene in Guyana, and I was blown away because those images were not widely available and they weren't commonly seen in that time during that period. So in 2007, after 11 years, I decided that I wanted to do other things. I closed Mackenzie Heritage, and but the importance of images is something that stayed with me, and and the way in which photography has evolved to enable us to create photographic images that tell stories about us as individuals, as families, as diverse communities, and how this self-reflection affirms our identity. It's a confirmation of that what we have experienced actually existed, because sometimes there's a denial about things that might have happened in the past, and photography is a great way of having recorded those things. It's quick and it's accessible. Well, it's quick and accessible now. In the early days it wasn't. The great thing about photographs is that with our eyes we see things that are not being said. So photos capture the aspects of lives and experiences like special events, and they can tell us a great deal about the people, the places, and the period in which the photograph was taken. And capturing past life events right up to the present also enables us to actually see the expressions of the subjects, the people in the photos, giving you a glimpse into what they might have been feeling or thinking, a sense of their personality, and an idea about the relationships that existed between people, which lends itself really well to deconstruction for working with individuals and groups. Photographic images give us clues and can lend a helping hand by helping us to identify the components of identity, links between gender, race, culture, status and social background, and citizenship, and can be made by utilizing digital imaging processes, platforms and techniques for looking at those issues, and as a medium for photo sharing, reflection and critical discussion in identity mapping and exploration. So, when you sit and talk to somebody about what's going on in the picture, those are all the kinds of areas that you might be able to interrogate if that's appropriate. So photographs are a really invaluable and essential part then of life story work. They can help people to explore the past in relation to their personal experience and can act as a prompt to help them talk about any feelings that may arise from looking at the photos themselves. Working with photographs also can provide you with a focus or working together, so looking at pictures together and selecting them, and can be used in a number of creative formats, so including life story books, collages, in DVDs or reminiscence boxes, for instance. But it's also important to bear in mind that some cultures kind of don't like taking photographs, is not acceptable, and in different cultures may have different ways of recording and preserving memories. So that's just one thing to be mindful of. With life story work, it's not just about gathering photographs together about a person's life. It's essentially about how you work with someone to help them to document their life. So that's kind of like another important consideration. A life story book may be your desired product outcome, or, doing the piece of work. However, there are a number of ways to use photographs to tell life stories. So, creating a memory board, creating a photo album, using a digital photo frame or a loop to trigger memories, using a tablet computer to store and display photos, which has the added advantage of you being able to sort of zoom into it. A film of a person talking about their life, or might involve a selection of photographs with text, perhaps to a favorite piece of music, or creating a photo collage. May be some of the options for using photographs to tell life stories. Between, you have to decide which is most appropriate for children and what's most appropriate for elders. So questioning, in terms of really thinking about a picture now, one of the ways that you can encourage people to talk about their experience, and this might apply more to elders and triggering memories, is to question a photograph. It can, that you're viewing together, and the kind of things that you might help someone to think about is like what's happening in the photograph, what kind of clues are given about the identity of the subjects, who do you think the sitter is, why do you think they're wearing what they're wearing, what do the clothing and the props in the photographs tell us about the identity of the person, how important is the background in the photograph, what kind of mood does it give you, what is the photograph trying to say about the person's aspirations, if anything at all, what clues might be in the photograph about the person's social or cultural background, and what do you think the relationship is between the people in the photograph, and how do you think the person in the photograph feels about the image of themselves. So that's just a few ideas of the things that could be going on in your head in terms of working with someone or a group and helping them to think about and look at photographs. So I'm just moving on to the next slide. So life story work is intended to help looked after children, for instance, make sense of their situation. It can attempt to answer things like, who am I, how did I get here, and where am I going? At one time, I worked as a photographer for BAF, which is the British Association of Adoption and Fostering, and I illustrated many of their publications with photographs. That was back in the 1990s. And one example of one of the books that I illustrated was the life story work book published in 1993, which has since been updated, and I think it's now in its 3rd edition. And for that workbook, I was commissioned to take photographs that showed the process and importance of life story work for looked after children. So it kind of like charts a journey from the initial research about a child's background to the end result, with images were chosen to show readers examples of the life story book process that could be followed. And I've also run photography workshops with children and families, which enable participants to explore themes like family, culture and identity. Photographs were taken by the participants or of the participants of the process and the end results. so that they could record their contributions and creations. Participants have created digital art, group photographic installations and photo books. These are similar approaches that are the practical side of creating life storybooks with children, which is also possible to do. Life story work is an individual biography for a child in which photographic images can, be a really important component. Photographs, if they're available, can help children from separated families to make sense of their past experience from birth. Seeing is believing, basically. And so the life story book should contain photographs of significant people and places. And it's a good idea to be interactive and get the child to contribute their ideas about the images as far as they are able to. With Looked After Children, it's important to make the most of all the opportunities to take photographs of them in their current situation. So for instance, if they're with foster carers or still with their birth family, because that situation may not continue, to be able to get photographs of that particular period in their lives is really important. So this is where, having access to a camera of some kind is really, really helpful. So because gathering information retrospectively, especially with young children, can be more difficult than gathering it at the time. So realistic, often unposed, unsmiling, spontaneous photographs can convey a sense of what's really going on at the time, because sometimes with a child that may have been adopted, for instance, if they look back at a happy photograph with their birth family, they might also, a question that might come into their mind, if it looks like a happy family, is, well, then why was I adopted? So, so in selecting images, it's important to kind of like be as realistic as possible. With older children, though, retrospectively visiting important places from the past, like, for instance, where they were born, like going back to the hospital, for instance, and taking a photograph outside, is possible to do, and could add more to their experience of their personal life story and sense of self. So they may also want to help with actually taking a photograph, not just be in it. So it's important to make space for that in your approach. You can also create a sort of non-probing sense of meaning by appropriately encouraging older children to help with the selection and captioning of photographs, especially with photographs that are about them. Or, if you're creating a pictorial family tree or something like that, letting them choose the picture that kind of resonates with them. So captioning is important because it adds a further layer to the remembering process for children later on. So we use photos to support the words, and to help this, you can consider what somebody else might want to know about the photographs. For instance, like where, when, who, and why. What are the multiple truths connected to the photo? So if somebody's looking, if you're doing it with a child and they look at the picture 20 years later, if that information is there in the caption, then they won't have to try and draw it from memory. It might have been lost. So just in practical terms, thinking about the photos is to have them in a central place, like a box file, to store photos that have been gathered together. And then you can photocopy or scan them so that the originals can be kept intact. And once you've got your visual information bank, if you like, once that's ready, the photocopied pictures can then be cut to size and stuck on the pages of the life story book in chronological sequence, and leaving blank pages for new photographs to be added later. So you can start with a title, plan, your page layout, write your text, and then put it all together. General categories for photographs might include things like self, home, school, family, my support network, my favorite food, or even a self-portrait, for instance. So you could get a child to look in a mirror and draw a picture of themselves, or you can set up a situation where they can take a photograph of themselves. As this can be quite an intense process with a child, it's probably a good idea to work with children, and if possible their primary carer, for about an hour or up to an hour session on a fortnightly basis, sort of, and in that process building in a way of editing pictures so that photographs can be swapped around if necessary. Remember that the child's input is central to this process, and so encourage them to take ownership of the life storybook that they've created by surveying its contents together once it's finished, and once it's finished, sorry about that. It's important that the life storybook is of good quality, so think about the materials that you're choosing, for instance the paper that you're sticking things down on. A glue that won't kind of like lose its adhesive after a year or two, and that it's of good quality, so that reflects the precious nature of the work that you've completed together, and that it will last for that child for a long time to come. So with working with elders, thinking about using photographs, for about the last 11 years I've worked for an intergenerational arts organisation called Magic Me, and their projects enable groups of elders and young people and children to come together using fun and creativity to explore issues and create great artwork together. And there's often a reminiscence element in this type of work. And at one point, I can remember working on a project at the National Gallery with a group of African and African Caribbean elders from a day centre in Camberwell, London. And we focused on a particular painting called Extreme Unction by a French artist called Nicolas Pouzot. This painting is all about death, and which is a taboo subject for many people. The great thing about the process of this project was that the elders were able to talk about their feelings and beliefs about death. With it being an African and Caribbean group, it was all about death and spirit and stuff like that, which they weren't able to talk about at home with their own families, and which they really wanted to talk about. So they made concertina art books which conveyed their thoughts about their own deaths and what they wanted to happen, so that they could take them home and use them as a prompt to talk about that kind of issue at home. The books contained many cultural and religious reference in terms of their belief system that they held about life and death. These concertina art books, the books themselves, they were pre-made from blank card. They were square, with photos, poems, and art objects could be stuck down and the pages decorated. So they were quite sturdy, and then you could either kind of like push them flat, or they would just sit concertina on the table. So that's another approach to a book that you might use, but might not be very practical for life story work. So the life story work with elders is a tool to enhance the person-centered care being provided to older people, particularly those with dementia. It provides people with dementia with an improved sense of identity and self-worth, and it can also help a person to feel proud about their life, through that recalling process. It can make them feel listened to and valued, and it can assist with triggering memories, which is really important, and can give them a voice to say something that they might want to say, like with the elders at the gallery. Reminiscence therapy and life story work can range from one-to-one delivery, so working with one person, or, to a group. It might involve the development of a life story album for a person, involving care home staff and relatives, or it might involve group reminiscence work with memory prompts like photographs. Again, this work gives elders an opportunity to talk about their life experience and involves recording relevant aspects of a person's past and present life with the aim that they will use the life story to benefit them in their present situation. So photographs can be used to illustrate themes with elders along a timeline. So the timeline might be the date and place of birth, parents, siblings, childhood, working life, significant life events, significant places or holidays, social activities and interests, later life and retirement, and their life now, you know, the kind of things they like to eat and drink, what they enjoy doing, their likes and dislikes, and maybe their wishes for the future, if you get that far. Life story work with individuals you can make a start by involving the person and family in the selection of the photos, pictures, or any objects they might want to include. And then you can, in the same way, you can then photocopy or scan photographs so that the originals can be returned to the family. Next, you then set out the photos with the person in a timeline for that person's life, like a visual storyboard or memory board, starting from the very youngest days and moving through to the current times. So, yeah, and in doing that, you can see where there might be any gaps. When displaying your photographs, try to include writing or captions, and avoid using or selecting photographs that are of unhappy or disturbing events, such as past trauma, failed relationships, because they could cause distress of some kind. So once the materials to be used for the life storybook have all been gathered together, lay out each page using photos, mementos, stories, newspaper cuttings, that kind of thing. Put photos at different eye level, different levels, or in a pattern, so that the person's eyes have to move around when viewing them. And then you can glue the elements to the page, and remember to use a thickish paper or card that can easily hold the weight of what you're gluing to it. And once completed, laminate all the pages so that they can be wiped clean if necessary. So, just to recap a little bit, so let's remember that individuals can draw on a diverse range of materials to tell their life story. They can certainly embark on a multisensory journey to depict chapters of their life, and sometimes the multisensory bit is, you know, that kind of photographs, you know, you're using your sight, you're seeing things that may have happened in the past and or that are happening now, and you know, and also you're kind of like drawing out meaning from a photograph. With objects, it could be, you know, with you know, playing music while you're working with an elder. That's their hearing sense. So you know, you can stimulate people on multiple levels. The most important thing to remember is that it's a step-by-step process that is never finished, and it is an ongoing creative process, so it can always be added to as events or, you know, there are life changes. So just to remember then in our recap, you know, take as many photographs as possible of a looked after child in their current situation before that may change, and keep all the photographs in a central place. Gather together and collate chronologically photographs that are, you know, key to the stages of the person's life narrative, and think about, you know, kind of like what's in the picture. So lightly record on the back, and I would say this not just in life story work, but looking after photographs in general. lightly record on the back of the photograph who, where and when info about the photo. And when I say lightly, I mean maybe with a pencil or very lightly with a ballpoint pen, not with a felt tip because it can bleed through to the other side. That information helps you to capture the photograph that you've after you've collected it, when you've photocopied it and you know what the information is all about. So you photocopy and scan photographs in the way of kind of like keeping the original safe, and where possible involve foster carers, family in the life of the life story. Who are in the life story work with the recipient where appropriate, and because it kind of like it can add to a sense of continuity in terms of there being other people around, not just yourself. And store the photographs in a safe place like a box file. And remember that a life story book is not, I think it's one of the most important things really, it's not just a photo album. Photographs and other objects and materials in a memory box can kind of like accompany a life story book and help an individual to unravel their story. So so you can add, even with the pages of a life story book, if you're sticking down images, for instance, somebody can decorate, a child could decorate the pages, for instance. So you could have decorating tools. It's kind of, you're creating something from scratch, and that is much more than a photo album. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I'd like to thank you again for joining me, and I'd like to thank Gradle as well. And I don't know if there are any questions or anything, Gradle?
No questions yet, but I'll just let you finish and then I'll ask you one question, Anita.
Okay, so this is just a little bit about myself. The other hats that I wear, I'm an interfaith minister and spiritual counsellor. I'm trained in meditation, mindfulness, mediation and spirit release therapy, as well as photography. I'm also a trainer, and I'm a marriage care course facilitator. I'm a mum and a grandmother, and my ministry revolves around personal and spiritual growth and development in terms of photographic arts, health and well-being and spirituality. And the Mackenzie Heritage Picture Archive that I set up was the first black picture library in the UK, and there at the bottom there are all my contact details if you want to make contact with me. Okay, Gradle.
Brilliant. Anita, thank you. That was really very full and informative, and much more than I thought that you would do. Thank you so much. I love the way that you went through just helping us and guiding us on how to do life history work for both children and adults. Really amazing. Thank you. And what I wanted to ask you was, do you run workshops for helping people to learn the skills, as you've been showing a snapshot of it, for life history work? Do you run any workshops at all?
Not, I haven't run workshops for life history work specifically. I have in the past run family archiving workshops. I used to do a lot of that when I was running Mackenzie Heritage. I think I'm just about to re-embark on that journey, because I did a talk at the Black Cultural Archives last week, and I'm doing another one at the Victoria and Albert Museum on the 30th of April. And I think that in the pipeline there's going to be some of that work around. So yeah, I haven't specifically, but I am open to doing it if anyone would like me to do it for them.
Okay, so what we might tell our members is that we can set some workshops up if people wanted to meet with you and have some hands-on workshop furthering some of the things that you've just discussed and shown us. I really especially love your top tips. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. And I also wanted to say, in terms of the images, the Mackenzie Heritage images, if workers wanted to use some of those themselves for work, could they use them? Could they duplicate them? How does that work?
Okay, well, I stopped running the library in 2007, and at the end of last year I gave over everything on long-term loan to the Black Cultural Archives. It would be possible to use them, and I think if you look at this last slide, it's got the Mackenzie Heritage website there. On that website there's a contact page, so if you contacted us and you wanted to use the images, especially if you, for instance, you got the book and you wanted to use some of the images from the book, because then you could just contact us and then we could talk about it.
Right. Okay. I mean, specifically, I'm thinking for work with elders, if you wanted to have some memory work that you used in a pack, and as direct work that workers do, is it possible to use a copy of the image for that pack? Those sorts of things.
It would be, but you'd need to contact us first. Yeah.
Okay, that's lovely. All right, that's good to know. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you so much, Anita, and